Your work is worthless, Tyler.
If I am not valuable, I wonder how many more hours you will be valuable.
The room went silent the moment Calvin Maddox leaned back in his chair and said it loud enough for every department head to hear. Your work has no value. Tyler, no context, no warning. Just a clean verbal punch delivered minutes before the final validation chain was due for our quarterly audit. I'd spent 12 months building that chain, 12 months of cross-checks, instrument logs, verification loops, but apparently Calvin thought a public insult would boost morale. I didn't argue. I just closed my notebook, walked out of the conference room, and headed back to my desk, trying to convince myself that maybe his theatrics were the worst part of my day. They weren't. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or quietly humiliated, you already understand the kind of storm that was coming for me next. And if you're still here, listening to this unfold, don't subscribe unless you're ready for the parts they never wanted you to see. And right after that, the second my monitor woke up, I felt something cold press into my chest. My entire validation folder, every file, every chain, every documented cycle was gone, not corrupted, not misplaced, deleted. For a few seconds, I just stared. Then I opened the internal system log, half expecting to see some random overnight process glitching again. But the timestamp glowed back at me like a joke delivered with perfect comedic timing. User, Calvin Maddox, action, delete Ross, validation, chain. That was the moment the shock turned into something else, something drier, flatter, almost funny. I wasn't angry. I wasn't panicking. I was genuinely impressed. Calvin had used the highest-level administrative account to personally erase the one thing keeping this company's certifications intact. That took a special kind of genius. People around me started peeking over their monitors. They'd seen enough workplace meltdowns to expect another one. Someone even whispered, "Is he okay?" like I was about to flip a desk. Instead, I let out a small, involuntary laugh, the kind you make when the universe hands you a plot twist too stupid to be real. A junior analyst crept closer and asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" I rotated my chair, kept my voice calm, and said, "Nothing." He blinked at me. "Nothing," I shrugged. "No need. The system will take care of it." He didn't understand yet, but he would. Tomorrow. Everyone would. I began the next morning pretending that nothing unusual had happened, though the tight pressure behind my ribs told another story. Quiet anger sits differently heavier, sharper, almost metallic. I moved through the office with that weight settled under my collar, gathering the offline copies I'd kept over the past year. They weren't weapons, they were insurance, the kind auditors would require when they inevitably asked why an entire validation chain had vanished. I saved each file methodically, forcing my breathing to stay steady. I told myself this wasn't revenge, just responsibility. Meanwhile, marketing buzzed around the building like excited bees, rehearsing the grand speech Calvin planned to give at next week's leadership summit. The theme was, apparently, 12 years of visionary leadership. I passed the enormous poster they'd printed Calvin frozen in a heroic stance with the caption, "Legacy of Innovation." I almost laughed. The irony was so thick I could have sliced it with a lab scalpel. I stood there a moment, letting the bitterness settle before walking on. My desk felt strangely quiet, as if even the keyboard didn't want to provoke me. That's when Jamie from Quality Control slid beside me with the posture of someone carrying forbidden gossip. "You didn't hear this from me," he whispered. "But Calvin's been bragging in the pantry. Said deleting your files saves him a whole year of messy audits." I stared at Jamie. My jaw clenched so tightly it ached. A slow, humorless smile crawled across my face. "Is that what he thinks?" I asked softly. Jamie nodded, eyes wide. I leaned back in my chair, letting the absurdity of it all wash over me. "Well," I said finally, "let's see what the system says about that." The anger didn't leave. It simply folded itself into something cleaner, almost elegant, the way ice forms along a window frame. I kept working, cataloging drives, backing up instrument logs, and noting timestamps that would matter later. Every step felt like preparing for a storm only one person in this building didn't know was coming. At lunch, chatter drifted through the break room, people discussing Calvin's upcoming speech, his vision, his unmatched foresight. I sat quietly in the corner, stirring cold coffee and thinking about how foresight might have included not deleting federally traceable data, but who was I to judge by mid-afternoon? The office buzzed again. Marketing needed last-minute feedback on Calvin's introduction. Someone handed me a draft out of habit. I skimmed the glowing praise, paragraphs dripping with admiration for his commitment to excellence. I returned it with a polite nod, swallowing another wave of bitter amusement. By the time I shut down my workstation, I had everything I needed quietly gathered, neatly stored, and ready for whatever the auditors would request. I wasn't plotting, I was preparing, and underneath that disciplined calm sat the same low, simmering anger he'd mistaken for compliance. He would learn. The first sign that something was wrong arrived before I even finished my morning coffee. I walked into the office expecting another round of Calvin's theatrics, maybe another speech about innovation, but instead, the entire floor stared at their screens in frozen disbelief. A loud system chime echoed through every workstation, followed by a company-wide alert flashing in bold red letters. For a moment, no one moved. Then the email opened itself automatically on every monitor, including mine. Validation chain corrupted, immediate investigation triggered. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The room erupted exactly the way I expected, half panic, half denial, and a generous helping of cluelessness. Calvin stormed out of his glass office as if summoned by the universe, barking at the IT team before they even reached their desks. "What did you people break now?" he shouted, waving his phone like it was Exhibit A in a trial, only he understood. The IT director, a man who aged 3 years every time Calvin spoke, held up both hands. "We didn't touch anything," he said. "We haven't run diagnostics or updates in 2 days," Calvin scoffed. "Then why does the system think the entire validation chain is corrupted?" I bit back a smile. Quietly, politely. The kind of smile you hide behind a coffee mug because the truth tastes too good. Watching him demand answers felt almost cinematic, like watching the Titanic's captain deny the existence of icebergs while water sloshed around his ankles. And somehow, he still believed he was steering full speed ahead. By mid-morning, messages poured in from every department: legal, regulatory, operations, quality assurance. The panic migrated across the building like a fast-moving flu. No one dared say it out loud, but everyone knew who had handled the validation chain. Everyone also knew who had deleted it. Still, I stayed silent. I listened. I observed. And the more Calvin tried to blame the IT team, the stronger the irony became. I could almost hear the universe whisper, "Really? That's your story around noon?" Another automated alert hit the system, this time from the National Compliance Board itself. A second email appeared on all screens, far more serious than the first. "Submit full validation chain within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in suspension of all certifications." The entire floor went pale. Calvin stared at the message as if reading it harder might change the words. I looked ready to retire on the spot. Managers exchanged glances that asked the same unspoken question: where is the chain? Who has it? I didn't raise my hand. I didn't volunteer. I simply leaned back, letting the chaos unfold exactly as it had to, by the end of the day. The conclusion became unavoidable. The only person who had ever maintained that data was me. And now, thanks to Calvin, the only copies left in the building were sitting in a digital grave he'd dug with his own hands. The panic meeting started at 6 o'clock in the evening, long after most people had already given up any hope that the day could get worse. I walked into the conference room feeling the pressure settle on my shoulders like a physical weight, the kind that makes your breath shorten before anyone says a word. Calvin stood at the head of the table, pacing in sharp, frantic bursts, his tie crooked, his face bright with anger he didn't even bother to hide. The rest of the team sat stiffly, watching him with the kind of dread you usually reserve for incoming natural disasters. I took a seat near the back, hoping distance would help me keep the frustration coiled tight behind my ribs. Calvin slammed his hands on the table, shaking the water glasses. "Rewrite everything," he shouted. "From the beginning, I don't care if you fabricate it or reconstruct it. I want the validation chain rebuilt tonight." For a moment, no one breathed. The air itself felt frozen, caught between fear and disbelief. Everyone in compliance knew exactly how illegal his command was. You don't rewrite data tied to federal timestamps. You don't recreate logs generated by machines that leave digital signatures. You don't lie to an audit board and hope for the best. I looked at him, the anger pressing upward like steam under a sealed lid. You want us to violate legal standards, I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse hammered. He snapped back instantly. I want you to shut your mouth. Tyler? The room stirred, discomfort spreading like a ripple. I could feel the eyes on me, some sympathetic, some terrified, some silently begging me not to escalate. But I didn't need to escalate. The truth was already doing the work for me. Every file he had deleted was stamped, tracked, and shadowed by external systems far outside his control. Anything we rewrote would be caught within minutes by the National Compliance Database. I leaned back slowly, letting the anger settle again into the cold restraint I had learned over years of dealing with leaders who didn't understand the systems they claimed to run. Calvin kept shouting, berating every department in reach, insisting someone fix his mess, though he never called it that. I eventually stood, gathering my notebook in one hand. No one tried to stop me. Not even Calvin noticed me leaving through the side door, too absorbed in his unraveling performance to realize the only person who could save him had just walked out. As I reached the hallway, a manager hurried up behind me and whispered, "Tyler, the system is about to expose him." I nodded once, I know. The pressure in my chest loosened slightly. Not relief, but clarity, the quiet certainty that the collapse had already begun, and nothing Calvin shouted in that room would change what was coming next, and for the first time all day. I felt a calm resolve settle in, steadying everything inside me completely. If you think you understand, the next paragraph will change your mind. The auditors arrive just after sunrise, the kind of hour when the office is still half asleep and even the printers sound nervous. I stood near the entrance with a warm cup of coffee, watching the federal team file in with quiet, controlled precision. They didn't stomp, didn't posture. They simply moved with the calm assurance of people who knew they would find exactly what they came for. I felt oddly steady as I watched them pass, like the eye of a storm drifting calmly while everything around it spun apart. Calvin, on the other hand, rushed forward with a smile so forced it could have cracked. "We're just experiencing a small technical hiccup," he announced, projecting confidence that fooled exactly no one. The lead auditor, a woman with sharp eyes and a tablet already open, raised an eyebrow so slightly it was almost polite. They followed him into the conference room, where half the company seemed to be holding its breath. I took a seat at the far end of the table, not hiding, but certainly not volunteering. I didn't need to say anything, the system was about to speak for me. The auditors connected their device to the internal server, bypassing IT entirely. Federal agencies don't request access, they already have it. Calvin hovered beside them, hands clasped, talking too fast. "We've isolated the issue. Nothing serious, really. Just a minor corruption of files, probably a malfunction during a routine update." No one responded. The lead auditor tapped a single command on her tablet, and within seconds, the screen on the wall lit up. The room fell silent. 12 seconds. That's all it took for the system to restore the independent backup logs stored off-site. 12 seconds for the truth to appear in bright, unmistakable text. User Calvin Maddox's action delete chain files. For a long moment. No one blinked. The audit team began writing immediately, hands moving with clinical precision. They didn't look at me. They didn't need to. Their job wasn't to assign blame. It was simply to document reality. And reality was glowing on the screen like a neon confession. Calvin stared at the log as if he could will the letters to rearrange themselves. This must be a glitch," he stammered. "Some kind of system error." The lead auditor finally looked up, her expression neutral. "System errors don't have fingerprints. Mr. Maddox." A faint ripple moved through the room, shock mixed with a hint of satisfaction from people who'd spent years swallowing his arrogance. Calvin opened his mouth again, searching for words, but nothing came out except another pathetic attempt. "Maybe a T accessed my account. Maybe someone spoofed it." "Your account requires biometric confirmation," the auditor replied calmly. The deletion was manual. I sipped my coffee, hiding the small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. There was no triumph in me, no gloating, just a quiet, steady acceptance. The truth had arrived, early and uninvited, and it didn't need my help to be heard. The storm had officially begun. And for once, I wasn't the one caught in the rain. Do you see why this detail changes the whole story? The collapse didn't start with shouting or alarms. It started with a single sentence from the audit team, spoken so calmly it almost sounded merciful, due to the break in the validation chain. The last 10 years of certifications will need to be reevaluated. For a moment, the room didn't process what that meant. Then Calvin's face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug behind his eyes. He tried to speak, failed twice, then managed a strangled 10 years. The lead auditor simply nodded and continued writing, unaffected by the panic she'd just detonated. The news traveled through the building in seconds. The investment department erupted, first phones ringing, chairs scraping, people sprinting down hallways with the look of employees trying to outrun their own resumes. I watched two analysts argue about whether they needed to freeze funding immediately. One of them actually dropped a laptop. It hit the floor with the same thud Calvin's career was making. Then came the partners. Emails flashed across every monitor, contract suspended pending regulatory review. Some were polite, most weren't. A few included the phrase material breach of integrity, which is corporate language for we no longer trust you with anything sharper than a paperclip. The vice president showed up next, breathing like he'd run up 6 flights of stairs. He read the audit report twice before muttering, not even quietly, "Calvin, you just erased your entire history." It wasn't an accusation. It was a funeral announcement. Calvin didn't respond. He just stared at the table with the expression of a man realizing he'd spent a decade building a sandcastle at low tide. I stood by the window, half hidden, watching the office dissolve into pure, unfiltered chaos. People rushed past like ants whose hill had been kicked open, panicked, directionless, desperate to save whatever they could, and beneath all of that noise, I felt something darkly satisfying settle in my chest. Not joy, not revenge, just a quiet, dangerous sense of symmetry. Calvin had deleted 1 year of my work. The system had deleted 10 years of his. Someone approached me cautiously, as if I might be holding the detonator that triggered all this. "Tyler, can this be fixed?" he asked, voice trembling. I turned from the window, keeping my expression neutral even though a sharp, private amusement flickered underneath. "It could have been," I said, "if he hadn't deleted it." The man swallowed hard, nodded, and hurried away, probably to join the evacuation happening on every floor. Behind me, the building kept spiraling, louder and faster, collapsing in real time under the weight of one man's arrogance. And for the first time, I let myself enjoy the view. The morning of the public announcement felt strangely calm, almost too calm for what was about to happen. The conference room had been rearranged into a modest briefing space, no stage lights, no television cameras, no dramatic production, just a row of chairs, a podium, and a quiet hum of reporters from industry journals and technical publications. The people who truly understood what a broken validation chain meant were the only ones invited. In a way, that made the whole thing feel sharper, more deliberate. Truth didn't need spectacle. It only needed witnesses. I stood near the back wall, hands in my pockets, listening to the low murmur of conversations. Some reporters already knew the situation was serious. Others were guessing, whispering theories and comparing notes. None of them had any idea just how directly the blame would fall. I felt a slow, steady breath leave my chest, a feeling of release, the kind that only comes after months of swallowing frustration. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity doing what gravity does. The representatives from the Federal Compliance Board entered with folders tucked under their arms, moving with the same unshakable precision I'd seen during the audit. They didn't glance around the room for approval. They didn't posture. They simply approached the podium and began. No theatrics. No build-up. The lead official opened the folder and read aloud, her voice clear and clinical. The corruption of the validation chain was executed by CEO Calvin Maddox. The room froze. Pens stopped. Fingers halted above keyboards. You could almost hear the sound of a career snapping in half. She continued reading, outlining the consequences: suspension of all prior awards, revocation of active recognitions, and immediate review of every leadership commendation Calvin had received over the past decade. Each sentence felt like another nail quietly driven into the coffin of his legacy. Word traveled fast. Within an hour, employees began gathering near the main lobby where the massive Legacy of Innovation poster had hung for years. It was already gone, just 2 clean hooks left on the wall where Calvin's proud smile had once presided over the building. The absence of it felt louder than any announcement could have. I walked past the empty space, hands still in my pockets, letting the quiet satisfaction settle inside me, not triumphant, not smug, just grounded, balanced, a weight lifted without fanfare, under my breath, low enough for only the marble floor to hear. I whispered, "Legacy revoked." It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even vindication. It was the quiet power of knowing the truth had finally spoken, and spoken loudly enough that no one could ignore it. And in that stillness, for the first time in a long time, I felt free. They called the emergency board session late in the afternoon. The kind of meeting where no one pretends it's about alignment or strategic direction. It was a purge, wrapped in corporate language. I was asked to wait outside, though I didn't need to be inside to imagine what was happening. The walls were thin, and Calvin's voice, usually loud enough to rattle glass, was strangely muted, like someone trying to bargain while running out of oxygen. I leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, listening to the distant hum of executives discovering truths they should have known long before the auditors showed up. A few employees passed by, offering sympathetic glances, the kind people give when they know you're not the target of the firing squad. Not today. Anyway, roughly 30 minutes later. The conference room door opened. Calvin stepped out first, and the sight of him almost made me pity the man almost. His face was the color of printer paper, eyes hollow, shoulders slumped as if the title he'd worn like armor had finally been peeled off. He didn't look at me. Not yet. Behind him, the board filtered out with the solemnity of judges leaving a courtroom after delivering a unanimous verdict. The chairwoman stopped in front of me. Her expression carried none of the softness employees had shown. Just practicality. "Mr. Ross," she said, "Mr. Maddox is suspended effective immediately." I nodded once, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, a thin blade of cold satisfaction turned slowly. Not cruelty, just justice settling into its proper place. "We need someone who actually understands the integrity requirements of our systems," she continued. "Someone who can rebuild the validation chain the right way." Silence stretched for a moment, and I felt dozens of eyes circle around me like a spotlight tightening its beam. Calvin finally lifted his head, glaring at me with a mix of hatred and helplessness. The irony tasted sharp enough to cut. I stepped forward, steady and measured. "I'll help," I said, "but only if everything is rebuilt according to the proper standards. No shortcuts, no improvising, no rewriting history." A ripple went through the hallway, approval mixed with relief. Even the board seemed grateful I'd set the rules before agreeing. They knew they had no leverage to push back. Their compliance certification, their contracts, their reputation, everything hinged on the one thing I refused to compromise. "Of course," the chairwoman said quickly. "Everything will follow protocol." Behind her. Calvin stiffened. He finally forced out a whisper, the only thing he could still control, a glare dripping with resentment. If looks could corrupt data, my entire hard drive would have melted. But he said nothing. He couldn't. Every consequence he now faced was the direct result of a choice he'd made with his own hand, as the board members dispersed. I turned slightly toward him, not enough to acknowledge him fully, just enough to make the message clear. This is what doing things correctly looks like. Calvin, cold, precise, true. Rebuilding the validation chain felt less like repairing a system and more like unearthing a decade's worth of buried truth. The board gave me full authority. But I didn't celebrate. I simply walked into the audit room the next morning, nodded to the federal team, and got to work. Quiet, steady, methodical, exactly the way the chain had been built the first time, before Calvin ever decided to streamline anything. We started with hard device logs, pulling raw timestamps straight from the machines that generated them. Then, we moved to partner archives, cross-referencing independent backups from laboratories, inspection facilities, and certification partners. None of this was fast, and none of it was glamorous. But watching the chain slowly reappear was like watching a patient regain a pulse after everyone else had declared time of death. The auditors worked beside me in complete silence. They weren't warm, but they were fair professionals who understood exactly what they were looking at every time one of them opened a recovered file. Their expression tightened slightly, as if connecting dots they hadn't expected to find. I didn't comment. I just kept guiding them through the maze. By midday, one of the auditors paused over a report from 2018. This was signed by Calvin Maddox. He noted, "I didn't look up. That's what the signature says." He tapped the screen. "This is your writing style." I gave a small, quiet shrug. He asked for help that year. We moved on. But the pattern repeated. Another audit member flagged a 2019 renewal package signed by Calvin, formatted like me. Then a 2020 crisis response log, the one that saved the company during a supply chain breakdown. My data, my structure, my work. The room grew heavier with every discovery, not accusatory, just aware of a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for a very long time. Late in the afternoon, they pulled up the 2017 restoration chain, the one that had infamously rescued the company after a catastrophic data failure. Calvin had accepted 2 awards for that recovery. 2? The auditor turned the monitor toward me. This one isn't even subtle. He said. I studied the screen for a moment. He was right. The format was unquestionably mine. Down to the way I nested the anomaly markers. Calvin never learned how to do that. No one spoke for a long time. The truth sat between us like a sealed envelope finally opened. Near the end of the day, when the last pieces of the new chain were assembled, the lead auditor closed her laptop and looked at me with something bordering on respect. Mr. Ross, she said, do you realize you've been holding this company together for a decade? I met her gaze calmly. Not proud, not humble, just factual. I know, I replied. The words came out steady, almost soft but grounded with a weight I'd carried quietly for years. A quiet victory, a reclaimed truth, and the room understood. The final audit presentation felt nothing like the chaos that had come before it. The conference hall was filled, but the atmosphere was steady, almost reverent, as if everyone already sensed the magnitude of what was about to be revealed. I took a seat near the middle, visible but not central, letting the quiet anticipation settle into my chest. It wasn't nerves, it wasn't fear. It was something far deeper, something that had been waiting a very long time to breathe. The board members entered first, followed by the federal audit team carrying a single consolidated report. No theatrics, no polished speeches, just the truth finally given a microphone. The lead auditor stepped up to the podium and clicked the first slide onto the massive screen behind her. A hush fell instantly. Findings of the independent compliance audit. The title read. Then the bullet points appeared one by one, each landing with the weight of a verdict long overdue. Former CEO Calvin Maddox has been removed from all historical achievement records. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Shock. Yes, but also a sense of inevitability. Calvin was not in the room. No one expected him to be. All validation chains from the past decade have been confirmed to have been maintained and authored by Tyler Ross. My name filled the screen in large, unambiguous print, gasps this time, not dramatic, but genuine. People turned toward me, and I felt the warmth of recognition rise in my chest, not loud, not overwhelming, just real. Company viability preserved due to the integrity and preservation of data maintained by Mr. Ross. The room erupted into applause, strong, collective, almost cathartic. I sat still for a moment, letting the sound wash over me. It wasn't pride in the sense of victory. It was pride in survival, in resilience, in having done the right thing even when no one was watching, even when someone tried to erase it. A board member gestured for me to stand. When I rose, the applause got louder. I didn't smile widely. I didn't bow. I simply nodded once, a quiet acceptance of a truth that had been buried for far too long. When the presentation ended, people approached me in waves, handshakes, gratitude, expressions of disbelief that one person had carried so much responsibility on their back. But eventually, the room thinned, and I slipped out a side exit, craving air more than attention. Outside, the sky was bright and open, a clean blue stretching overhead. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight lift, not crash, not explode, just lift, in the stillness. One thought settled with perfect clarity. He said my work had no value, but it was the only thing that erased his entire legacy. I stood there a moment longer, letting the truth settle, not as anger, but as something far better earned, grounded, and entirely my own. If someone tries to erase your work, remember what's built on truth can't be deleted. And if you're still here with me, tell me you're listening from where today. Drop a comment, tap like, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe if you want more moments that hit a little too close to home.